my purpose at the moment is to review just a bit of what I think I said last time and to see if it's kind of anything like what you got, and perhaps to say what you got from last time before we get going for my planned curriculum for tonight. So this diagram is perhaps a little too full, but if you imagine it with just the boxes and the big arrows and not all the little annotations, we're talking about what I was saying, that you start with expected excitement, some excitement, and you invest a little bit, and maybe you get like more excitement because you're looking at a character or something. And then after playing, the question is whether the excitement fell flat or at least was only repeated without, and then you're told, okay, look, we're going to do it again. And you're like, okay. Or whether you've got a completely new excitement that's built out of what happened in play and built out of your experience in doing it. And that isn't just excitement, it's inspiration. It's like you got color 1, and now the question is whether color 2 is its own unique thing. And this is important. It's not just like some maundering principle that I was gassing about. This is what it all comes from. This is what anything and everything we do in game design is intended to facilitate, make possible in a unique way. If it doesn't happen, it's a fail, a flat fail. We can look at lots and lots of role-playing games which are poor, score poorly in this regard, and I am blunt. They are a flat fail. I don't care if they're like a great role-playing game. It's no good. And so I'm completely abandoning the notion of hobby popularity and, hobby loyalty and anything of the kind. It also has very little to do with marketability. We're talking about whether the game works. We can call it the color reward cycle, I guess. You come in excited by the color, and whether you get your reward or not is about whether it's kind of recursive. It's about whether you've got, the color to keep you going. Yeah. Do you want to comment on that whole cycle picture thing at all?
Yeah, sure. I really appreciate it. I felt like it kind of helped to solidify something that I've been intuiting from my past design experience outside of game design. The idea that like you play a game for a reason, and the game is successful in so much that it gives you the experience you anticipated getting, or that you were excited to get from the game. That makes a lot of sense to me. It
can also have the emergent properties where you're newly excited. You're not, as I said, it's not merely contractual one for one. Okay, I came in excited about this. Oh, that's what I got. It's returned to you with interest or even with transformation.
Right.
And so with that in mind, we can take a look at some of the annotations on there, perhaps. You'll notice that the system annotations are very extensive, but they are sort of the last step of game design in some ways. They're conceivably or categorically the last step. It doesn't mean you can't start there and work your way outward, but they are really, when all is said and done, one should recognize that they are effectively products of all the other decisions. Even if you started with one because you felt like using 12-sided dice, that's okay. But ultimately, in terms of the way the design functions, you can't start with 12-sided dice and say, that's what it's all about, man.
Right.
Even if the way you started was to hold up a 12-sided die and say, you little son of a bitch, I knew there was something good I could do with you. What will it be? That's okay.
I feel like that's, myself included, a lot of people who were like, they start playing RPGs and then they want to design. After that, they kind of start from that of like, well, wouldn't it be cool if I did this systematic thing? Let me figure out some way to make a game around like that.
That's perfectly okay from an experiential point of view. From the point of view of what steps did I go in what order, there's nothing wrong with that. And I do it all the time. I mean, I'll flatly say, I looked at two things in Slay With Me, which was the way that John Harper wrote Recoil, and I said, ooh, I like the format of that presentation. And I thought of a little stack of dice that you tip over. Period. But that doesn't mean that the way the game is structured utilizes those as its framework. Those were only my points of departure.
Right.
And that's an experiential thing, not a principle thing. Because any point in any of this can be a point of departure. That's why there's no such thing as a game design protocol that says do this first, do this second. It's impossible. That's like saying, how did you write the song? Well, first you start with this. No, you don't write a song by starting with this all the time.
No.
It's the same thing. But when all is said and done, there are structural elements of the music of which the other parts are subroutines. That's how it ends up. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. So all that systemic stuff is in that category. They are subroutines. So another thing is the nature of that reward coming out of there. You'll notice I say reward mechanics in a special place. They're still just mechanics, and they are optional, but they are, if present, they are helpful toward that big arrow, and that big arrow matters. The big arrow is what is the kind of satisfaction we got out of this? And you'll notice I use the plural, we. We are not talking about individual consumer, individual satisfaction. We are not. And we will get to that later. So right now, though, I want to go in from the arrow that runs into system. Okay, that's what I want to focus on tonight, which is you're picking it up and you say, what is it from the point of view of working with it to make it go? And so we're going to talk about that tonight. And that's where that PDF that I posted for you matters. And we'll use Kinfolk as a stand-in, but first we have to look at the games that I stuck in there arbitrarily.
Right.
The columns as you go across have to do with what is and isn't fixed, what is and isn't chosen, what is or isn't, well, you'll see. So the first column is things that are fixed for play. If we were to play Skyrealms of Jorun, the way the game is presented is it's set in Jorun. However, you could have other games where the setting is wide open and other things are fixed.
I remember I watched your video, Katie's Tea Party, and you mentioned that sort of before. You know, in
right.
Troll Babe, you play a Troll Babe.
Right.
In Katie's Tea Party, you are Katie's Imaginary Friends, etc. Yeah.
And so this is I was taking him through those columns.
Right.
And so this is a really important thing to understand, is that different games have different answers in the columns. And to take two games, which I did not choose because they are very different, but chose, strangely enough, because they're actually quite the same in many ways. Dogs in the Vineyard and the original version of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. You have a disparate party. They confront major difficulties, both of their location and of their own composition. To explain that, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is the first version that introduced the assassin as a subclass of thief. And assassins had to be of evil alignment, as well as the paladin as a subclass of fighter. And paladins had to be lawful good. Thieves, incidentally, which had already existed to some extent, but were much more elaborate here, had to be neutral. So the assassin and the paladin contributed an immense amount of firepower to a party. Hands down, especially at the mid-level, hands down, phenomenally effective. So The question is, how do you get along with a paladin and or a thief and or an assassin in the same party?
Right.
So you have and it was also heavily implied that thieves would be stealing from party members.
Right.
Okay. What I'm trying to say is you have a group of people who are traveling about and they are encountering dangerous situations and they are disparate potentially in their values as well as their capabilities. So dogs in this sense and advanced Dungeons and Dragons of this vintage really aren't all that different at that level. So let's take a look at what is and isn't the same as we go across the columns. Things that are just plain fixed. And actually, I'm not sure I wrote this in the dogs column, but it should say party as well, because it is a party. You play as a party. That's done. You don't split up in dogs to massively different destinations. And in Dungeons and Dragons, that's interesting. There's certain commentary about that. But we have a fixed idea that this is a band. Then there's also, in Dungeons and Dragons, as you can see, certain other fixed things, but not much. In dogs, there are some things that are very fixed. But that's fixed for everybody and everything. The next thing is noted options, things that you have to pick in order to play, but there's a list to pick from. Race and class is the obvious one for Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Dogs, background, and ethnicity, which, if you think about it, really aren't all that different from race and class in that game. And then there's a few other things. But they do start to differ slightly at this point. You will notice that you have to pick gender and ethnicity in Dogs in the Vineyard. Whether you want to call the character race's ethnicity or not, I would tend to lean toward yes-ish for D&D. But certainly gender is not something that you are told you have to pick. It's not a piece of the rules to do so. Some of the character sheets started to say male, female on them, but it's not even mentioned in the rules. As we go across, things get a little bit more a little more nuanced when we think about spendable points or assigned things. There are other categories which are enjoined. They're quantitative and randomized. Rolling for money, rolling for characteristics, things like that. The only one in dogs, if I'm remembering correctly, is actually the outcome of the initial conflict. That's the only thing that's randomized in character creation or in the start of play. So the idea being here that you've got other things that you can choose, but you have a limited currency to do it with. You have so many points. In D&D, that's money that you arrived at randomly, but once you have it, now it is elective spending for what you're going to get, so therefore your gear is in this category. You'll if you think about some of the other games you may know, I'm thinking about games where you're just handed 100 points and told to spend it on your attributes. So
hero system or something like that.
But so you're getting the idea that you can put really, really different things into these columns. This is the whole point. I've done workshops where I brought in this chart and had people fill in, as you can see, fill in your favorite game and fill in the game you're working on.
Gotcha.
And people will suddenly start to make a couple of inferences that we need to talk about. So as you run your way across, well, that's kind of what we're going to do.
Cool.
I'm going to say, let's take a game that you didn't design, but that you love very, very much, and let's run it across.
Okay. I'm going to go with Golden Sky Stories.
Which is fine, because I know nothing.
Yeah, it's a good game. I like it. So should I start moving my way through the columns?
Sure. And in fact,
Okay.
you may find yourself filling them in out of order. That's okay.
Yeah. So fully fixed, you play a group of henge or animal spirits
Hmm.
outside of a pastoral Japanese town.
Oh wait, I just
And
read Golden Sky Stories in Italy.
okay, yeah.
All right, shoot, it's not a complete mystery after all. Damn it! I was
You
kind of
might have
looking
stumped
forward
it,
to
I think.
this, but okay, but go ahead. So you're going
Yeah.
to play an animal spirit, case closed,
Hmm. And
as well as the setting is case closed.
yeah, yeah. Um, you choose. I might go back to fix fully if I think of more,
No,
but
that's okay. Go out of order. Just stick things.
yeah.
Yeah.
You choose what kind of henge you play, like which
Mm-hmm.
animal. There are non-animals to play, but it's all essentially the same.
Mm-hmm.
You also choose, given that animal type, what your powers will be.
Right.
Um,
So from the animal type, then you have your choice of powers. Okay.
right. I think that there are, yeah, you verbally customize the aesthetics of your animal, so you get to
Mm-hmm.
pick what their clothes are like, and they have a list, of suggestions, but you're not bound by that list. So I'm going to guess that's not really the same as fixed chosen.
Well,
Would it
the
be?
if you're not bound by the list, it's a good question. What I would say is that you have to customize somehow,
Mm,
and that's required. That final one, which is completely open, is when they don't even ask. That's
okay,
what that's for. So even
gotcha.
if the list is a little loosey goosey, it's
You can still
clearest
change it.
if it's pretty codified. But even if it's not, even if it says 10 things kind of like these things, then
Right.
that's in that column.
Okay. Then yeah, you choose the look of your henge in its human form. Um, you also have a little. I think you have a little room to fiddle with the. Yeah, you pick the dimensions of your relationship with each other person in the party.
Now hold on, let's that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Is that limited in some way? You're given this many points or this many pluses to do it with?
Yeah, if I recall correctly, it's been a little while since I played, but you have you could start with um some at like one, and other members of the party at one, and some other members can be slightly higher. You have some points to spend, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
and each one has like you admire them, or they're your rival, or
Right.
and there's mechanical effects of each different type of
Sure.
relationship with the other person.
If they're quantified and you only have so many to shove around, then that's in the
Oh yeah, yeah.
category of currency.
Customized points.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Yeah. So
That makes
that's
sense.
so anyway, you're getting the idea. I know now that
Yeah.
you see that, and also it's interesting that one typically doesn't think of relationships as like buying gear,
Hmm.
but in this scheme, they are.
Yeah.
So, anything else?
Um.
Are the attributes or any mechanical features are
Yeah.
they fixed
Yeah.
by race or animal?
No. You pick from four different attributes, more or less, and those are customized by points.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Again, so you spend, put them,
Yep.
Okay, cool. So if you think about it, is you'll notice that many games of the older stripe didn't even ask about stuff like whether your character has a scar in their face or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then as time went by in role playing, and so that would have been in the last column. If you thought about it, you could do it, but you didn't even bother. It wasn't even textually a piece.
Right.
Um, and I remember groups that had different aesthetics about that could sometimes be a little strange when somebody sat down and says, my fighter has two golden braids, and everybody else at the table would kind of look at the person and be like, "What are you talking about?"
Is that a
That
magic item I don't know
Yeah,
about?
I mean, exactly. What on earth? And so, whereas in another group, if you sat down, you might be a little surprised at how gaudy everybody was.
Hmm.
So, if you grew up reading like the Bullfinch's mythology, where all the Greek gods are elaborately described in terms of what kind of jewels they wear and everything. There's a tendency to do that with your character, and if you didn't, there's a tendency to wonder why on earth you're playing Barbie.
Right.
So anyway, as time went on, and as character sheets started to feature such details when the rules didn't, then people started to put them in the rules. Oh, by the way, eye color, hair color, and then they started giving tables for that, so that would shift the column even further.
Right.
So there's no real meaning or importance to being over to one side of the chart to over to the other. It's just that they are different columns.
Right.
So, okay, the idea being, though, now that we look at the D&D and the dogs and Golden Sky, you start to see, I think, that different games, well, let me put it this way. Games with very different topics could have extremely similar columns.
Right.
Games with very similar topics could have very different columns.
Right.
And that is a surprise sometimes to people because they think of, well, I don't know why it's a surprise, but it is. Particularly when it comes to gaming genres. So you would say, well, old school fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be a little shocked at how many OSR games differ drastically from one another across these categories. So that's kind of something I think people should think about a little bit more often. So with this in mind, now we'll take a look at kinfolk.
Okay. So fixed fully, the game is 5. Or you okay? So first you're in a troop, which is similar to a party. Mm-hmm. So you're in a troop of fairies and magical creatures. The game is 5 sessions. You can change that if you really want to, but the game is always a set number of sessions agreed upon before the Chronicle starts.
There's elective, and then there's elective because I have to say it.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds like we're going to say 5 and move on from there.
Yeah. 5. Yeah. The setting is fixed.
Mm-hmm.
You play in the forest, defending against the Empire of Man. Chosen, you choose your tribe, which type of fairy you are, and you get to choose some powers given the type of fairy you are. So far in game, let's see. So I think it would be fixed chosen. You have a name, and your name is like Pharos of the Red Mist,
right?
Whose braids reach the ground. Like you have a name, and they act as kind of descriptors. I think that would be kind of fixed chosen.
Right.
Customized points. You have points that you put into traits that help with conflicts. I don't really have anything customized randomly that I can think of. Customized verbally would probably be stuff like appearance and things like that.
Anything else that rolls like what if 2 characters are related, for example?
Exactly.
Right. So there's really no way to say what's in that category until you watch people play it a lot and see what people throw in.
Right.
So
curses are fixed chosen as well.
Is that so? And they all start at the same value, or is there some kind of okay? So good. So right now you have what looks to be very much a menu-driven kind of, here are your choices. Keep picking choices until you end up with the composite of the character,
right?
Which is fine. Different aspects of preparation can also go in here. I tend to focus on character creation because that's kind of where the mind settles for many people, but we could be talking about things about the upcoming scenario. And so, for example, in the first, in the fixed column would be perhaps the starting Is there a quantitative indicator of the health of the realm, for example?
Not as such yet. One thing that's fixed fully is the initial question that you ask is, will the kinfolk survive?
Right.
That's another thing.
Right.
I want to work more on describing or allowing the changes that occur to the forest to be visible and decided by play.
Mm-hmm.
But I've just been struggling so much with resolution that I haven't really delved into those.
Well, good enough. Good enough.
Yeah.
But at the moment, I do know that you basically want the 5 sessions to determine the fate of the realm.
Yes.